When we talk about the golden era of Hollywood musicals, the whirlwind of feathers, sparkles, and lavish dance numbers, most of us probably picture the famous faces that have graced countless movie posters and TCM retrospectives. Yet behind those legendary headliners was an entire ecosystem of performers whose talents and personal stories often remain hidden or half forgotten. Today, let's step into that shimmering world and spotlight one remarkable figure who danced right at its heart, Toby Wing. Though she never became a household name like some of her contemporaries, she left her own distinct mark on Hollywood. And when you dig beneath the surface, you'll discover a lively, determined, and at times heartbreaking story that reveals the more human side of that storied time. So get comfortable. Maybe pour yourself a cup of something warm and prepare to meet Toby Wing like never before. A spark of the 1930s who balanced glamour and struggles with equal grace. No matter how many times we revisit the show-stopping choreography of Busby Berkeley or rewatch a classic screwball comedy, the 1930s remain one of the most fascinating decades of American entertainment. The pictures may have been black and white on screen, but the reality behind them was anything but bland. It was a period shaped by the Great Depression, by the shifting role of women in entertainment, and by an evolving sense of what Hollywood could offer a weary public. For a lot of people in that era, life was about survival and grit. For moviegoers, it was about escape and fantasy. Producers discovered that audiences would flock to musicals and comedies, hungry for a glamorous distraction from the stark economic realities they faced day to day. And so big studios like Warner Brothers, Metro, Goldwyn Mayer, and Paramount churned out film after film, employing hundreds of dancers and chorus girls who would grace the background with synchronized steps and radiant smiles. It was precisely in this charged atmosphere that Toby Wing entered the scene. Born on July 14, 1915, in Amelia Courthouse, Virginia, Toby had a background that was steeped in both opportunity and challenge. Her father, Paul Wing, worked in Hollywood in various capacities, sometimes described as a master of ceremonies, sometimes as part of the behind-the-scenes operations at a major studio. This meant Toby had an early link to a world most people could only dream of, yet Hollywood didn't simply open its gates wide and usher her in on a red carpet. Like many other hopefuls, Toby started from the bottom, which for her meant entering as a teenage chorus girl. She was barely out of childhood when she found herself learning complicated dance routines among dozens of other aspiring performers. If you can imagine the hours of rehearsal, the grueling demands on the body, and the fierce competition, then you'll understand that Toby's journey was not for the faint of heart. It was easy to get lost in the crowd. Studios sought fresh-faced dancers who could blend into the kaleidoscope of swirling sequins, creating that signature Hollywood spectacle. But Toby, with her blonde hair and infectious smile, stood out. She might have begun her career in the background, but it wasn't long before a camera lens or two discovered her. Despite her petite stature and youthful looks, she possessed a kind of confidence, a twinkle in the eye that the camera seemed to love. By her mid-teens, Toby was snagging more visible spots on screen. The budding star found herself rubbing elbows, sometimes quite literally, with the famed Gold Diggers and Busby Berkeley girls, those high-kicking ensembles that turned film musicals into mesmerizing geometric fantasies. If you watch some of the early 1930s musicals, you might catch her for just a fleeting moment. Pause the film at the right second and there's Toby, cheekily peeking over the shoulder of a co-dancer, or perched at the edge of a sparkling set piece. Her big screen journey started modestly, with cameo spots and roles that didn't even warrant an on-screen credit, but she stood out for her vivacious presence. We like to imagine that every star leaps onto center stage fully formed, but Toby exemplifies the actual process so many faced. Cameo after cameo, audition after audition. Every little moment was a chance to attract the notice of a casting director. Toby appeared in classic musicals such as 42nd Street, 1933, and Gold Diggers of 1933. Two giant hits that revolutionized the musical genre with their kaleidoscopic dance routines. Under the direction of Busby Berkeley, a visionary choreographer who turned dance numbers into near-surreal experiences, Toby twirled in complicated patterns meant to dazzle audiences. These musicals were shot at a breakneck speed to keep up with demand. It meant relentless days, nights spent perfecting routines and the pressure of a famously tough choreographer. Yet Toby seems to have thrived under it. She had a dancer's discipline born of repeated drilling and a performer's zest, which gave her a playful spark. She was slowly establishing a name for herself, maybe not the star on the marquee, but certainly a performer that producers noticed. Toby's father, Paul Wing, wasn't just a casual bystander to her blossoming career. Although he had his own responsibilities within Paramount, he also kept a watchful eye on Toby's progress. She was, after all, still in her teens. He guided her, sometimes used his connections to ensure she didn't get overlooked, but also tried to protect her from the unscrupulous aspects of the Hollywood machine. This was an era of notoriously predatory studio executives and questionable moral codes behind the scenes. Contracts could be punishing. Your next job might depend on pleasing the right person. Nevertheless, Toby's father encouraged her to keep dancing, keep smiling, and keep auditioning. Even so, Toby faced frustrations. She was singled out as a wampus baby star in 1934, a title given to a group of young actresses deemed promising by the Western Association of Motion Picture Advertisers. That was a major publicity push, akin to being labeled the next big thing. Yet ironically, while many baby stars used the distinction as a launchpad, Toby found it challenging to leverage that buzz into major roles. She was regularly cast in the same type of parts: the pretty chorus girl, the fresh-faced co-ed, or the spunky blonde sidekick. She yearned for more substantial acting opportunities. One can only imagine the personal struggle. On one hand, she was grateful for the work, especially given that millions of Americans had no jobs at all. On the other hand, it must have been disheartening to realize that film after film, she was relegated to fairly shallow decorative roles. Perhaps ironically, Toby found some of her brightest moments on screen in comedic or cameo roles where her bubbly personality could shine through. Take Search for Beauty, 1934, which was a pre-code comedy that featured a plethora of toned young men and women engaged in a fitness competition. While the movie itself might not stand as a cinematic masterpiece, Toby's presence was unmistakable, a bright burst of playful energy among the comedic chaos. And in Murder at the Vanities, 1934, a film that mixed murder mystery with lavish musical interludes, Toby again found a small yet noticeable niche. Here was a pattern. Toby frequently ended up in projects known for their mesmerizing dance numbers or comedic intrigue. But ironically, these attributes overshadowed her chances of being recognized as a truly versatile actress. At the same time, Toby started making waves off screen. Hollywood gossip columns were as potent as the films themselves, shaping public perception and catapulting certain starlets into fame, or infamy. Toby's personal life soon became a topic of chatter. She was rumored to have dated a number of celebrities, including the singer and bandleader Pinky Tomlin, who was known for folksy comedic tunes. There were breathless tabloid rumors linking her to other well-known figures, a typical pattern for starlets trying to keep their name in the press. Yet Toby's love life wasn't just a strategic PR game. She was young, effervescent, and meeting interesting people every day. It was only natural she'd build connections, some fleeting, others more serious. Interestingly, Toby seemed especially drawn to men who had a certain flair about them, like Maurice Chevalier, the iconic French singer and actor with whom she was rumored to share a flirtation. Whether these stories were real or exaggerated, they cemented Toby's public image as an eligible, vivacious star on the rise. But if you look closer, you'll see that Toby wasn't just a naive dancer bathed in studio lights. She was quietly testing her boundaries, figuring out what she wanted from life, and learning firsthand just how powerful the Hollywood rumor mill could be. Yet for all these rumors, Toby's real-life love story would take her far from the bright lights of Hollywood and into an entirely different realm of adventure. She eventually fell in love with and married a man named Henry Tyndall Dick Merrill. Dick Merrill was an aviation pioneer, a pilot who set distance and speed records. He was older than Toby by more than a decade, if not nearly two. Though they seemed an unlikely match at first, Toby, the young blonde starlet, and Dick, the mature pilot, their relationship provided Toby with a sense of genuine stability and excitement at the same time. He wasn't a Hollywood figure. He was a man of the skies, and the daring spirit that propelled him to try record-breaking flights likely resonated with Toby's own sense of adventure, shaped by those early years as a teenage chorus girl thrown into the deep end. Before we discuss the marriage and life beyond, let's delve into Toby's later 1930s career, as the star system around her continued to shift. The production code, often called the Hays Code, had started to clamp down around 1934, ushering in a stricter moral standard for films. Pre-code Hollywood had allowed for more risque content, whether sexual innuendo, partial nudity, or subversive storylines. Now, with the code in full effect, studios reined in those creative liberties. For starlets like Toby, the transition could be a double-edged sword. On one hand, musicals grew more sanitized, possibly losing some of the freewheeling creativity that had given Toby's comedic cameo roles their sizzle. On the other hand, the shift could have opened new doors for more wholesome portrayals, if Toby could snag them. But the real problem was that Toby was stuck in a typecasting rut. Casting directors saw her as a quintessential showgirl with blonde curls and a knockout smile. They didn't seem interested in giving her meaty, dramatic parts. She was approached to do stage performances, musicals, and comedic sketches. That was the niche she was carved into. And while Toby did her best, signing up for what roles she could get, frustration built. In interviews later in life, she admitted that she yearned for those few fleeting roles that would let her show she could do something else, something more substantial. Yet in the end, the break she needed never quite arrived. That frustration found its resolution in part when Toby turned her back on Hollywood in 1938. She was in her early 20s, still brimming with energy, but she'd grown tired of the studio machinery. For some, leaving Tinseltown is a sad farewell to a dream. For Toby, it seemed to be almost a relief, a chance to escape the cycle of endless dancing, cameo roles, and questionable gossip. She recognized that she had found personal fulfillment outside the bright lights, specifically in her relationship with Dick Merrill. She was also looking ahead to a life that offered stability. Hollywood was notoriously ephemeral. One day you're the freshest face in town, the next day there's a dozen others lined up behind you. Toby had no intention of waiting around to become yesterday's news. Marrying Dick in 1938, Toby began a new chapter that might surprise those who only recall her in films. She effectively swapped film sets for airfields, yet she never lost her taste for show business entirely. She made sporadic appearances in stage shows, lent her face to promotional campaigns. Notably, she was once used in advertising for the perfume Taboo, giving her an iconic pin-up style presence, and did the occasional public event. But overall, the life she carved out with Dick Merrill was rooted in a different kind of excitement. Merrill had a reputation for record flights. In 1936, he famously completed the first round-trip transatlantic flight, known as the ping pong flight, where he filled the plane's empty spaces with ping pong balls to serve as flotation devices. His sense of exploration meshed well with Toby's own impulsive nature. Their life together brought them across the country, sometimes overseas, following Dick's aviation ventures. Toby turned into a supportive partner, sharing in his victories, comforting him in his setbacks. They had children together, and for a while it seemed Toby's path would remain stable. Unfortunately, tragedy struck when one of their sons passed away at a young age, an event that Toby rarely spoke about publicly. This heartbreaking loss left an imprint on her that friends and family recall as deeply painful. In those days, grief wasn't typically processed as publicly or therapeutically as it might be today, especially not for a woman who had once been a Hollywood bombshell. Toby's circle watched her navigate heartbreak in the only way one knew how in that era, quietly and privately, leaning on loved ones for emotional support. One of the lesser-known aspects of Toby Wing's story is the small but devoted following she retained over the years. Even though she never became the big marquee name, there were fans, some from the earliest musicals, who remembered her distinct look and playful on-screen presence. They wrote letters to her, sent fan mail, and asked for autographs. Toby, by most accounts, was surprisingly gracious to these fans. She'd send replies back, sometimes with an updated photograph. It was a small reminder that her time in Hollywood had mattered to someone. For Toby, who had largely stepped away from that world, these tokens of remembrance were both flattering and bittersweet, affirmations of what she once pursued and left behind. In later years, Toby would reflect on that era of Hollywood with a mixture of fond nostalgia and gentle disappointment. She enjoyed reminiscing about the dizzying musical numbers and the nights out dancing with other starlets. She also lamented the typecasting that kept her from blossoming further. Yet, as some friends have recounted, Toby never expressed deep bitterness. She took pride in the fact that she left on her own terms, that she married for love, and that she created a life that was fulfilling in ways a superficial stardom might never have been. It's a sentiment that resonates with many performers who realize the toll that indefinite hustle takes on the spirit. That said, Toby's departure from Hollywood did not mean an end to the complexities that shaped her life's story. She continued to navigate personal and financial challenges. One can't forget that the late 1930s and early 1940s were overshadowed by the looming storm clouds of World War II. Dick Merrill's skills as a pilot were in high demand, and Toby, as a spouse, had to manage frequent separations and the ever-present anxiety of losing him to the hazards of warfare or commercial flights that carried significant risks. Their household became something of a transitional space, never quite settled. Yet it also felt more real to Toby, with honest joys and heartbreaks, than the illusions she'd chased during her Hollywood years. Because Toby stepped away from the spotlight when she was still very young, a swirl of rumors and half-true tales grew around her. Some claimed she regretted giving up on an acting career. Others speculated that she made a fortune. Another rumor stated that she had been forced out by blacklisting, completely without basis, considering blacklisting controversies were more relevant in the 1950s, focused on alleged communist sympathies. Toby's story just got conflated with that of countless other starlets who left Hollywood behind. In reality, her exit was personal, driven by the exhaustion of show business and the pull of a more grounded, if unpredictable, life. One rarely discussed controversy centered on Toby's early roles in pre-code films that occasionally flirted with risque imagery. Decades later, when the production code was already an artifact of the past and Hollywood had shifted toward a different moral climate, some critics revisited those old musicals. They singled out the overt sexualization of teenage performers, Toby included. She was only 17 or 18 when she began dancing and revealing outfits on screen. Contemporary viewers raised questions. Was it appropriate to present such a young actress in that context? Toby herself, in a rare interview from her later years, brushed off these criticisms with a sense of practicality. She hinted that it was a different time, that no one had forced her to be there, and that she was proud of her work. But she also acknowledged that the film system had little regard for personal well-being or what we might call body autonomy by today's standards. It was the job, plain and simple. Another matter that sometimes sparks debate is just how voluntary Toby's departure really was. Some historians argue that Toby's diminishing roles in the late 1930s reflected a reluctance by producers to invest in her as a leading lady. They suggest Toby's departure was as much a forced exit, masked by the veneer of a happy marriage, as it was a free choice. Others believe Toby genuinely saw an opportunity for a fuller life and seized it. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. She wasn't exactly forced out, but she wasn't exactly courted for bigger roles either. In a city where illusions reign supreme, Toby's final bow is a puzzle piece to the broader conversation about how many female performers in that era made decisions shaped by a lack of real professional agency. If we pan out to consider Toby Wing's lasting influence, it's a nuanced picture. She wasn't an icon on the scale of Ginger Rogers or Judy Garland, nor did she star in dozens of beloved classics. However, Toby Wing represents countless dancers, actresses, and performers who fueled the glitz of 1930s Hollywood from the background, or from just the edges of the spotlight. She was one of the Wampus baby stars, a group that collectively signified the hope and potential of the new wave of starlets in 1930s America. Her time in iconic musicals like 42nd Street and Gold Diggers of 1933 means she remains immortalized on film for the curious viewer willing to look beyond the star billing. She stands for the dreamers of that era who dared to leap onto the stage with starry eyes, hoping their big moment might come. In this sense, Toby's story is essential to understanding a side of Hollywood that doesn't often get top billing. We see the complexities, the ephemeral nature of success, the machine that churned through thousands of hopefuls, the reliance on marketing and gossip, and the personal toll it took on performers. Toby Wing was more than just a pretty face in a sparkly outfit. She was a daughter, a wife, a mother, and eventually a woman who looked back on her short but intense time under the footlights with a mixture of pride and relief. Her journey reminds us that for every major star whose name graces the marquee, there are dozens more whose stories are no less human, no less worthy of our attention. In her later decades, Toby settled in various places, sometimes Florida, sometimes Virginia, often following her husband's aviation career. She wasn't wealthy by the standards of big Hollywood names, but she lived comfortably enough, involved in local community events, and occasionally surprising folks who recognized her from old pictures. People who encountered her described Toby as warm, a touch reserved, but still capable of lighting up a room when discussing the old days of dancing. She didn't mope about lost stardom. She seemed content. It's telling that Toby Wing's memory endures in the hearts of vintage film aficionados who see her as a kind of hidden gem, a symbol of that fleeting but memorable Hollywood shimmer. For those seeking hidden details, you might stumble upon small references to Toby in archival interviews with her co-stars or in niche fan magazines from the 1930s. In these snippets, you see a consistent theme. Toby was admired for her professionalism. She was often described as sweet, approachable, and in good spirits, which in the cutthroat atmosphere of Hollywood was rare. A lesser-known interview quote from a fellow dancer, remembered only as Billy, recalled Toby once telling her backstage, "Don't lose your smile even if they cut your scene. Someone's always watching." It encapsulates Toby's positive attitude, the idea that you should always bring your best because you never know who might notice you. An optimism that kept Toby afloat in an industry that tested even the strongest performers. One of the more emotionally striking facts that seldom gets mentioned is how Toby handled the heartbreak of losing a child. She never publicly exploited that personal tragedy for publicity, a restraint that was quite unusual for Hollywood figures, who often, whether by choice or by the studio's push, turned every personal event into a press release. Toby maintained a dignified silence, mourning her loss within the protective walls of her family. This sense of dignity speaks volumes about her character. She'd been thrust into the limelight from an early age, but at her core, Toby Wing understood the value of privacy. Even after her final departure from the film world, that sense of self-protection lingered. Her personal trajectory, from small-town Virginia girl to Hollywood showgirl to pilot's wife to mother to private citizen, illustrates the multifaceted journey so many took in search of the American dream. She achieved a piece of that dream, then decided it wasn't everything, and in leaving, she discovered a different form of happiness. That's a message that resonates well beyond the world of 1930s musicals. It reminds us that pursuing fame and success can be thrilling, but it can also be empty if it doesn't align with your deeper sense of self. Toby's choice to pivot away from the spotlight for a quiet, more ordinary life is something many people might find relatable. Maybe you set out to chase a high-powered career or pinned all your hopes on a single ambition, only to find contentment in a simpler path. Today, Toby Wing may live on mostly in film trivia, fan club footnotes, and the warm memories of those who still enjoy 1930s musicals. But her life has plenty to teach us about perseverance, about understanding our own limits, and about having the courage to change course when something isn't feeding our soul. She reminds us that the glamour of Hollywood's golden age was only one side of a much bigger story, one that included personal battles, heartbreak, and the quieter victories of finding love and family. And so while Toby Wing might not headline the typical documentary about classic Hollywood, there's a genuine and deeply human story within her experiences that's worth dusting off and sharing, especially for audiences who love the blend of history, biography, and drama. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.